You've entered BOOKSTORM with Kristen Civiletto and me, Chris Storm. This is a podcast devoted to best-selling books that matter, books that make a difference. We're diving down deep with beloved authors about their stories. We're exposing hot-button topics and heartfelt themes, the issues that affect each of us in our own lives, as siblings, parents, partners, friends, as human beings. We're braving new ideas, fresh thoughts, hard lessons, and important truths. Those kinds of things that stay with us long after we turn the last page and close the book. Well, welcome back to BOOKSTORM Podcast, all of you book lovers. And I've got one word for you today, Joe Pickett. You know him. You love him. We love that fantastic Paramount Plus series. Tune into the first two years of episodes. They're fantastic. And more than that, we have the author who created Joe Pickett, because we have CJ Box back with us here on BOOKSTORM Podcast for a second time. Welcome back, CJ.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be back. This is a fun one. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
We're thrilled to have you back here, and we're here to talk about the next in the series of Joe Pickett novels. And I'm going to just come right out and say, I think this is my favorite. It's 3-Inch Teeth. It is amazing. You're going to love it. But before we get started, for any of our new listeners, let me tell you a few things about CJ, because he has some really astounding accomplishments here. He is a #1 New York Times bestselling author of 30 novels. He's won all kinds of awards and accolades, including the Edgar Allan Poe Award, the Anthony Award, the Prix Calibre 38, the Maltese Falcon Award, the McCavity Award, Gumshoe Award, 2 Barry Awards, and so many more. Over 10 million books sold. And you want to know why? Because he is authentic, especially writing these Joe Pickett novels. CJ Box is a Wyoming native. He's worked as a ranch hand, a surveyor, a fishing guide. He's an avid outdoorsman. He's hunted, fished, hiked, ridden, and skied all throughout Wyoming and the Mountain West. He and his wife, Lori, have 3 daughters, 2 grandchildren. They live on their ranch in Wyoming, and we're thrilled to have him back to talk about his latest, greatest novel.
Thank you for having me. We now have 4 grandchildren, I'm happy to say.
Congratulations. Yes. I have 1, and it is the joy of my life. So
That's right. I agree.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, as Chris mentioned, CJ, we're here to talk about this fantastic book. And I'm going to remind Chris, every time she reads one of your books, she tells me that's her favorite one. So I think that's kind of funny. We loved it. We absolutely loved it. Now, in this story, if you don't mind, I'm going to give our listeners just a little bit of the background of what's going on in this novel. And if you want to add anything, of course, we'd love to hear it. But in your story, we are back with Wyoming Game Warden Joe Pickett. And in this story, he faces a couple different kinds of beasts. We have one that is a grizzly bear who is on the rampage. He is, he's taking actions that are harming people that we care about, that Joe cares about. But we also have another kind of beast, and that is somebody that long ago Joe helped put away. And many people will remember Dallas Cates. He is a very memorable character. 6 years ago, he was locked up, and he has a list of names tattooed on his skin, and he is out for revenge. In this story, we have a colliding of these beasts, and I'm not going to tell the listeners too much more about that because I don't want to give away some really cool aspects of the plot. But all I know is Joe Pickett and his buddy Nate Romanowski, they're ready. Would you like to add anything to that short summary?
No, that pretty much covers it. I assume you want. I've been fascinated with grizzly bears forever, and become more fascinated with them and what they can do in the last 5 years or so, because there have been an increasing number of what they call human grizzly encounters in Wyoming and across the Mountain West, and a few of them have been, once they dive down into them, do the investigations, are terrifying in that there have been attacks that were unprovoked by the victims. That's not normal bear behavior. That's unusual. For anybody who spends much time outdoors, like I do, hunting or out and about, when you find out about instances where, a 350 to 400-pound animal runs at you like a freight train and attacks for no reason, it's pretty terrifying.
Yeah, it sure is.
Extremely, extremely. And I've got to tell you, so my family, we are like obsessed with bears. We've been to Tahoe, Alaska, Banff. We are in a competition, my kids and my husband and I, who can see the first bear. But we're smart enough to understand bears are dangerous. So this leads into my first question. I've got to talk about this word that you brought up in the book, anthropomorphism. And for our listeners, it's attributing human characteristics to a non-human species. In your story, we see these two city women who call themselves the mama bears. They go into Yellowstone and they view the bears and they think they understand them. They connect with them. They know them personally and they give them names. And I had to ask you, in your bear research and in knowledge and writing of this story, how is this mama bear thinking different than a scientist or a biologist? And how can this be dangerous?
Well, it's dangerous in that, you say the word anthropomorphizing better than I do. But what it means is, yes, attributing human characteristics to animals. We all do it. I mean, anyone who has pets knows that, we attribute things to our animals that are probably not their thought process, but we like to think they are. And in this case, this is based on there are real activists who are, just like there are people who love wolves or the idea of wolves. There are people who love grizzly bears or the idea of grizzly bears. And in Wyoming, in the Mountain West, there are some celebrity bears that are very well known these days. They're assigned numbers because they've been collared and numbered by the wildlife officials. Now into the 500s, how many bears there are. But I did some research with what's called the Predator Attack Team in Wyoming. They're associated with the Game and Fish Department. They arrive like a SWAT team whenever there is a fatal encounter with a bear or an attack. And they helicopter into the site. In some cases, they trap the bear and relocate it. In other cases, they have to kill the bear. And one of the biggest problems for the Predator Attack Team are people who are trying to prevent them from doing either one to save the bears. The people who do it are, I would say, well-meaning with good hearts, but in fact, if it's a homicidal bear that's going to likely kill again, by thwarting those guys, they're basically, leaving the door open for additional attacks. So there is no group called the Mama Bears that I'm aware of, but I made that up based on the activists that are really out there.
Mm-hmm. It was very interesting. And we really grew to dislike those mama bears because I felt like they were working in ignorance without fact and only emotion. Maybe with animals, wild animals, you need some actual education and facts.
Right. And, the bear in particular that's in the book, who's doing rogue actions and going crazy and attacking people, is also based on a little bit of a personal experience of mine personally. When I was driving through Yellowstone Park about 5 years ago at 6:30 in the morning, it was in the summer, so I had my windows open and I could hear crashing. And I looked over and saw a grizzly bear running as fast as my car alongside the roadside, knocking down trees. And I've never seen anything like it. And I was going to a conference of game wardens, and I talked to a bear specialist who said something like, "Oh yeah, that's number 199. She lost her cubs earlier this year, and she's gone crazy." And it really made me think, and thinking that is a pretty good character for a book.
Loved it.
Yeah. Wow. And we're putting stress on some of these animal populations too. So we're seeing them act not consistent with what we would expect after, past observation. So that's really interesting. I want to ask you, we've been talking about beasts, and I think the internal beast also deserves some discussion because you really tackled some of these issues, like an overwhelming desire for revenge. And it's one of those, I think, feelings that you think you can control it, but like a wild animal, it can get out of control and escape you and maybe go too far. So I wanted to ask you, do you think that some of your characters who were wrestling with that idea of revenge knew that they were taking it too far?
I think the bad guy, the main bad guy in 3 Inch Teeth is a guy named Dallas Cates, who was introduced many books ago. He's a rodeo cowboy, a local celebrity who's a bad dude. And Joe Pickett was involved with putting him away kind of on trumped up charges with other law enforcement just to get him off the street, basically. Joe Pickett still feels a little bit guilty how that all worked. But Dallas Cates, from his point of view, has had his reputation taken away, his family killed, his property removed from him. So he's lost everything. So I'm not trying to make him sympathetic, but from his point of view, he's going after the people that ruined his life, and he wants to ruin their lives because he has nothing left. So even Joe kind of understands why Dallas Cates is coming after him. And so I don't know if that answers your question or not, but that's the only thing this guy has left is his revenge.
Yeah. And when you have nothing to lose, you will go over that edge into criminality or something even worse. And I thought it was interesting because a few of your characters, you push them to the very edge. And so now, I can't wait for the next book because I want to see where these, feelings of revenge take people, or is there hope? And you left a seed of both at the end of the story. So very well
Right.
done.
Thank you.
Okay, so my next question. I got to go back to the Grizzlies. I just can't get this out of my head. I thought this was interesting that as we became better educated on grizzly bears and the mind of an evil criminal, the reader starts to realize there's some similarities between a bear and a man. You taught us a bear is hardwired not to attack a human. They will do anything not to have an interaction. But if a bear crosses that line and kills in a predatory nature, a behavioral switch can take place, and it's likely they will cross it again, much like man. And I thought as the reader this: man and animal are similar, but does that similarity suddenly stop when we have to choose between the life of a human and an animal? And is this where the mama bears were getting confused and some of us get confused?
Right. And I think that's a natural kind of confusion, really. Again, it goes back to what we were talking about earlier. It's attributing characteristics to wild animals as if they were human. The rogue grizzly in the book, we may never know why that grizzly behaved the way it did. Whereas with Dallas Cates, we know his motivation. And he uses the grizzly bear attacks as cover for his own list of his own revenge and his list of victims that he's got tattooed to his skin. So one is using the other, but it's certainly not the bear using the human.
Mm-hmm. I thought that was fascinating, and that you did draw us to an endearing quality of that grizzly, but also showed us that grizzly will kill you. It's a fine line to get out there and walk in nature and not be wise enough to take precaution. And like Kristen and I were talking before the show, if Kristen was saying, she was telling her students, maybe you want to tell it, Kristen, about the driving down the car in the road.
Yes, we have these excellent debates about, what are people in relation to the natural world? Are we the equal? Are we better than? And, some people who believe that we are the same as animals, we always pose that question of, if you're driving down the road and there's a spider and a newborn baby, which one are you going to swerve to avoid? And it brings up many of the issues that you were really bringing up in the story about the value of life and sometimes the measures we have to take to protect life.
Right. And I think in this case, the difference is, and I portrayed this in all of the books from the very beginning, and that is that you can have a very healthy appreciation for nature and wildlife, but you also need to know that they are amoral. Man has the capability of being moral, of making moral choices based on right and wrong. Animals are more behave on how they're hardwired, on their instincts, and without reason necessarily attached to it. There are things that animals do that we can come up with reasons why they did it, but we'll never know. So in this case, Joe and the predator attack team know that this bear has behaved badly and therefore must be dealt with, but they don't know what's in the bear's head or the motivation of that bear.
Yeah, excellent. I want to pick up on something you just said, and that is this role of intuition and instinct. And we saw it in your story in terms of the bear and falcons, but we also saw it in people. So I want to talk about Sheridan and Nate because they are fascinating characters in their own right. Both were in tune with the falcons that they trained. They were both master falconers, and
Mhm.
they really were aware also of when something was off with people. They had a very good intuition. So I wanted to ask you, is it a coincidence that they were also good in working with the falcons? Or do we all have that intuition and some people are just able to develop it a little better? What do you think?
I think the latter. I know, having known and worked with and hunted with falconers before. I'm not a falconer myself, but I've spent a lot of time with them. They have a very defined kind of hardcore view of you know of animals and nature and the circle of life. I mean, a falconer is a falconer because their birds kill their prey and hunt for them. So they know that, in order to survive, animals must eat other animals. And it's kind of a bloody business, red in tooth and claw. So I think falconers, and the ones I know, have a much better understanding of wildlife in general than most other people do, even including wildlife biologists, because they're out there every day interacting with predators and prey. And so, of course, I fictionalize and enhance some of that, but the falconers I know feel akin to wolves and bears more than they do to the prey, and can pick that up in other people.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And I almost think that we have become so accustomed, some of us, to living in an urban area where we've almost lost touch with that ability to intuit situations and intuit that predator mentality, even in people.
Right. I mean, wolves are going to be wolves, bears are going to be bears. As much as we might like them, or appreciate them, they're going to do what they do.
That's
And,
right.
and I have this jotted down here just in case we had time, because I think this is just sort of mind boggling to me. When we go to any kind of natural landscape and we're in the search of a bear, what is it about humankind that draws us to bear danger? So we know it's dangerous. We realize that this is a grizzly, but what is it in man that I want to get a little closer, a little closer? Like, we were in Alaska and you could actually sign up for an excursion where you could be on a ledge overlooking a creek as close as you could possibly be to a bear, and it gets sold out.
I
What's
think
the
it I think it's as simple as it could be complicated, but it's also as simple as encountering a creature that we know is more powerful, stronger, and can eat us. You can have appreciation for other animals, but there's a certain reverence that comes when you know that that animal is bigger and better and stronger and faster than you.
Mhm. I like that. And mankind's this is what else I love about this book. You taught us a lot about bears, but you also taught us about respect for those animals and respect for a bear, and not thinking of it frivolously like a stuffed animal, but understanding who a bear is. And this is 3-inch teeth. Now, you want to tell the listeners why it's 3-inch teeth? Because that's pretty scary right there.
Because a mature grizzly has fangs as well as teeth, and those fangs on a mature, usually male grizzly, can grow as long as 3 inches. And one characteristic of human bear attacks is that bears tend to go for the face and head of humans first. They don't swipe at them with their huge claws. They bite their heads first. That's how, like the biologists know that it was authentic grizzly bear attack when they find a victim, is how many puncture wounds are through the skull.
Wow. Fascinating. All right. Now, before we let you go, CJ, give us a little glimpse. Can you tell us what you're working on next?
Yes, I'm about halfway into the next Joe Pickett book, and it is a continuation or a thread from this book, and this is Nate's Revenge in the next book. So it's going to be very Nate Romanowski centric, lots of birds, lots of heavy weaponry, big body count.
This sounds fantastic. And we're just so happy that you're doing another Joe Pickett novel. So for our listeners, tune into Paramount Plus. You're going to want to hear the first 2 seasons of Joe Pickett. And in the meantime, pick up this book, 3-Inch Teeth. You can connect with CJ Box at his website, cjbox.net. He's on Facebook, X, and Instagram. And it's been a pleasure having you here today again, CJ. So good to see you.
It's been a lot of fun. You guys ask great questions. Good for you. I appreciate
Thank
that.
you.
Thank you. Well,
Thank
that's
you.
because you're writing great books. That's how we have the questions. See you again.
Thank you.
There you go. Chris, first of all, there were so many cool underlying themes in this story, and I'm really glad you asked him that one particular question about why are human beings drawn to danger. And it's funny because when you asked him that question, I actually was thinking to myself, I have done this. I was in Utah and we were out in the middle of nowhere, and we were with a guide. He said, "That's Rattlesnake Hill over there. And it's rocky and craggy with, like, all kinds of little ledges." And he goes, "If you want to go and climb Rattlesnake Hill, there's a nest up there." Well, don't you know, every single person in that group we were with, we all climbed Rattlesnake Hill, and sure enough, they were under the rocks. Why did we do that? We were exposed the whole way. But you raised a really, really interesting point, and that is we are fascinated with the natural world. Maybe we don't have a healthy enough respect for the natural world. And I love that Joe Pickett is constantly worried about that. That's one of the things that I think drew him to being a game warden, because those animals may need protection, and so do people.
Yes, this is what I love about this story. It's so true. And this is why this story is so infatuating, because he talks and gives a lot of education on grizzlies. I learned so much about grizzly bears from this book. Now I have a whole new understanding of a grizzly and a whole new respect. But let me say something. I also like this topic that you had brought up, this idea that animals and man are totally equal. And I feel like we're gravitating as a culture greater towards this notion that mankind and animals are equal. I think it's because we have such a push to protect and respect animals today. And I think it's wonderful to avoid animal abuse and the use of animals in the making of products, home products, and protecting them. But when does this cross over into you've gone too far?
Yeah, well, right now in the law, we're wrestling with this issue because there are a lot of people who believe that the natural world has rights that belong to it, to a river, to trees, or to certain kinds of animals, particular ones that, we regard as particularly intelligent or human-like. And it is a fascinating topic. And I think that part of it is a response to the fact that we have done a poor job in terms of stewardship over the earth. And so there's a contingent of people that is pushing us even further because we have done a poor job. And I'm wondering where that balance is. I don't know if we're going to have an answer to that anytime soon, but I can tell you there's a reckoning coming because these are the cases that are making their way through the legal system right now. And what I loved about this story that CJ Box brought up is, we're dealing with a large mammal, one that appears to be somewhat intelligent, is very powerful, and that people have this affinity for, like you talked about with your family, loving bears. So now, what is that next step? Do we protect bears? Do bears have their own rights and interests? I'm not sure where that line is, but we are certainly going to have to grapple with it.
I think that that is a great thing, that we're protecting nature and that we're protecting rivers and lakes and polluted areas, and that we're protecting animals who don't have a say, who are innocent and can be used and abused and hurt in some way, or the animals that are almost extinct, to protect that species from extinction. I love all that. But I also loved what you said. You're driving down the road. Let's say it's not even a spider. Let's say it's a dog, our beloved pet, and there's a baby. What are you going to do?
Yeah.
And this is where I think the difference falls right there, to have the total understanding always that humans are different and that human life should be protected above, as in this story, the life of a grizzly.
Yeah. And, this is an issue I think people need to settle for themselves and affirmatively think about it. Who are you with respect to the natural world? Are you equal? Are you less than? I have a lot of people that I know who believe that humans are less than the natural world, that the only good that humans have done is nothing and destroyed it. And that is a real viewpoint. It is something that, again, we have to be open to hearing what people have to say. But I think individually we have to decide, where do I fall on that spectrum? And listen, three major religions in the world have this idea of stewardship, that we were entrusted with the responsibility for the natural world, especially when it comes to future generations. And that is another viewpoint. So I love that our stories, I love that you and I can always delve into that aspect, because this book intertwines with humankind in many, many ways, let alone the revenge, because that's a theme as well. Do we have a bear who is bent on revenge? I
I
don't.
love that. I just heard an indigenous author say, the land was not made for us. We are made for the land. And our job is to care for it and to nurture it like a gift. And it hit me when they said that. And I thought that is so true. And I love that. Now, on a lighter note, let me end with this. So yes, we're all obsessed with bears. My husband for years has been begging for one of those giant wood logs that's carved into the shape of a bear. It stands like 6 feet tall. We see it everywhere we go. And he says, can I please have one? And my only answer is, it just doesn't fit my decor, this bear. But someday, I said to him, someday I'm going to get you that bear. I don't know where we're going to put it, but we're going to get a bear. So listeners, thanks for joining us again on Bookstorm. We really love these deep, hot button, heartfelt, hot topics. We love diving in. So glad you could join us. And let me tell you who our authors are coming up. Just going to give you the name because it'll be here forever if we say the book. You're going to love them. Mary Kubica, Michelle Gable, Dervla McTiernan, Lisa Unger, Heather Gudenkoff, Liza Palmer, Christopher Reich, Wabashig Rice, Amiko Jean, Benjamin Stevenson, JD Parker, and today we signed Lisa Wingate.
I know, I can't wait to have those discussions. And listeners, Chris just told me that we are at 80 countries and territories where we have you. We think that you're responding to these fantastic, deep discussions with these authors. We love it. We're just thankful you're here and spreading the word. So stay with us. You can find us at bookstormpodcast.com. You can find us on Instagram, on Facebook, on TikTok, on X, and you can find us on YouTube. We love hearing from you, so please stay with us. Until next time, one of the best ways to brave the storm is to dive down deep into life-changing fiction.